Bills, Ravens, week 3, Sunday night football. Let's get ready for it. I'm joined by Kevin Oestricher of Locked On Ravens to preview an important AFC showdown today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into an episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills here on Crossover Thursday. We are a part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Kevin Oestricher, the host of Locked On Ravens. He is Joe Marino, the host of Locked On Bills. And we, of course, have your daily Ravens and Bills coverage 5 days per week. Today's Crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Joe, this to me has to be in contention for game of the week. Ravens and Bills, Sunday night football under the lights in Baltimore. Man, this Buffalo team is just steamrolled through these past couple of weeks. They established themselves one of the top teams in the AFC and honestly in the entire league. Baltimore started 0-2. They almost blew the game in week 3 against Dallas after a strong start, but they ended up picking up the win to go to 1-2. This matchup to me has everything. Has star quarterbacks, has great defenses, has talent on both sides of the ball. And for Buffalo, Joe, the thing that I love about Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen is the respect that both guys have for one another. We heard Josh Allen yesterday talk to the Buffalo media and was asked multiple questions about Lamar and said, quote, he's an inspiration to a lot of people in this country, talked about the resiliency he's shown, said he's really changed the way that guys play the game, but make no mistake about it, he can throw the snot out of the football. Got a lot of respect for him, a lot of love for him, and continue to talk about how both Baltimore and Buffalo's belief in both those guys have them where they are today. Two star quarterbacks are not facing off against each other offense, defense style, but it's always fireworks when those two play.
Yeah, I mean, clear your calendar for Sunday night. Even if you're not a Bills fan or a Ravens fan, this is what the NFL is about. Big-time quarterbacks, big-time stages, an important game for both teams. Obviously, the Bills looking to get to 4-0, and this is a big stretch of their schedule. 3 in a row on the road, starting in Baltimore, then they're at Houston, and they're at the Jets. So feels good to be 3-0, but you could see how things could change rather quickly. So an important game there, and then obviously things didn't go the way Baltimore wanted them to go the first 2 games of the season. Certainly had their chances against Kansas City and Vegas. And it's hard to think about Baltimore as their reigning number 1 seed in the AFC to be 1-3. And so it feels like an important game for both teams to get.
Yeah, and I know that we can talk about all those stats behind the 0-3 record and teams not making the playoffs and having a really hard time bouncing back from that. Well, 1-3 certainly puts you in almost a bigger hole if you're talking about now you got to go to Cincinnati and play the Bengals in week 5, it seemed. But if they fought 0-4 against Carolina, I know that's a game that they would be getting up for in week 5. But this week 4 game, Joe, Baltimore, Buffalo, I want to start with Buffalo for you. On the offensive side of the ball with Josh Allen, obviously he looks every bit of an MVP candidate, the top MVP guy in the league right now through these first 3 weeks, in my opinion. What have you seen from him, and what's kind of the biggest storyline that you've seen from this offense coming into the game here?
Well, the idea for this Bills offense going into the season after trading away Stephon Diggs and letting Gabe Davis walk in free agency was, all right, everybody eats. They're not going to bring in a true number 1 guy. This is about the entire breadth of options for Josh Allen. And the idea is that, okay, take away something. It doesn't matter. The Bills have other ways that they can play offense, right? That's what defenses do. They want to take away the best thing that you do, force you to execute and win in another way. Well, the Bills make that difficult on opponents because there isn't that one thing. And so you've seen the adaptability of this offense through 3 games. No matter how defenses want to present themselves, the Bills tend to have answers. And so it's been exciting to think about the idea of Josh Allen operating this offense, and I'll say it out loud, without having to throw the ball to Stephon Diggs 150 times, and then also not having to validate Gabe Davis as a true number 2 receiver. That's gone. Just run the play. Throw the ball to the open guy. And that's what Josh Allen's doing. And what's been really cool about that is not only do you see him taking less risks, he's just doing the smart, right thing with the football. He's not getting bored with the checkdowns. And that has led to a lot of offense for the Bills so far. And ideally, that's how it will continue the rest of the way. But obviously, the challenges get tougher and tougher.
Yeah, and I think the big thing when you're talking about matchups here with this Buffalo offense is James Cook, coming off a stellar 2023, is picked up right where he left off in 2024. Obviously, he's already surpassed his rushing touchdown total from last season, has 3 this year, 2 last year. But Baltimore's run defense is the best in the league by a pretty wide margin, giving up under 3 yards per carry. Joe, with this running game in Buffalo, obviously Josh Allen does play a big part in that and kind of the dynamic ability that he has. But, man, James Cook, is a threat as a receiver, can get out into space and make guys miss. How important has he been in this Buffalo success so far?
Well, I think James Cook is certainly a part of the puzzle here for the Bills. And James, I think, is a multifaceted player in terms of the receiving ability, in addition to kind of being a slashing style of runner. And it'll be a good test. I mean, Baltimore's got a really good front, and I have plenty of things to talk about in the next segment about that run defense. But it's a good test, a physical group that has, anchoring guys that can really anchor up front. And so James Cook's not really a physical runner. I'd say that about him. He's more of a slashing style guy, not going to get a lot of yards after contact, but he does well to set up tacklers and read off his blocks. And he's been productive, and there's been a lot of volume his way. And he's an important piece of this offensive equation. But what I'm interested in from the Bills side of things is, are you going to test out that Ravens run defense that's been so good, right? I mean, you mentioned it, the fewest yards, I think the fewest yards per carry. They're not giving up many yards, like adjusted yards before contact. It all looks really good metrically. Is it better to kind of go into this game testing the pass defense, where I think the Ravens have been more vulnerable on the defensive side of the football? And so I think James Cook is important, but I think this is one of those games where you're probably going to want to throw it a little bit more, not only because that's where Baltimore's been more vulnerable, but because I think getting a lead on Baltimore matters if you can do it.
Yeah, and that's key for both teams is making sure you can get out to an early lead and even just shutting down one aspect of the opposing team's offense. And the way that Buffalo can do that to Baltimore's offense potentially, Joe, is with their pass defense. That's one of the most impressive things to me is they have been going through injuries. They're a banged-up secondary right now, but they have had guy after guy after guy step up in that secondary. Would you call that the biggest storyline for Buffalo on the defensive side of the ball, or would you maybe go to a Von Miller resurgence or one of those key storylines?
Yeah, Von Miller being back is a pleasant surprise. I mean, really just nothing, literally nothing coming off the ACL last year. And he looks close to his old self. I mean, you talk about prime Von Miller, that's a Hall of Famer. But whatever you thought the 35-year-old version of Von Miller could be at its best, I think you're getting that. So that's definitely a big story. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about a defense that in the back seven is without some important players. And not only, like, there's transition. Of course, the Bills transition away from Tre'Davious White and Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. So that's a story in and of itself. But the fact that you don't have any of your second level, Matt Milano, hurt. Terrel Bernard, your team captain, really good emerging young player, hurt. Taron Johnson, all-pro slot corner, hurt. Those guys aren't playing in this game. But the Bills have made it work absent of those players. And I think part of that is just a defensive system and philosophy that's been in place for a long time and experienced guys stepping in. The Bills play nickel. That's what they do. They run nickel defense. 79% of the time, they're in nickel this year. And that's consistent with where they've been. And Cam Lewis, a guy that's been around, but is not a household name, but this is his 6th season. That time on task sets himself up well to be able to step in and play. Jamarcus Ingram, his 3rd season with the team, stepping in and playing as the dime safety. Balin Spector filling in for Terrel Bernard. It's his 3rd season stepping into that role. And so I think experience depth has really mattered for the Bills defensively for them to not have a drop-off, but also game scripts, right? Game scripts really matter. When you can play with leads defensively like the Bills have the last 2 weeks, you can hunt those big plays. And I think that's been a big part of their recipe and why they've been successful on defense to this point.
Yeah. Buffalo's pass defense currently number 2 in the entire NFL in terms of net yards per attempt, giving up just 4. Those are good numbers for that Buffalo secondary. And again, you talked about it right there, Joe, paired up with that pass rush. If you have those two things aligned, your defense is probably in a good spot. Something that John Harbaugh talked about with the Ravens is said that late in games, that has not been the case with Baltimore's pass rush and secondary. So coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be diving into some storylines on the Baltimore side of things and how Buffalo matches up with this Ravens team. So be sure to stay tuned. We have a lot to dive into on this crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime, and I love going to live events, no matter what kind. I've made a ton of great memories over the course of my life, whether it be going to sporting events, music, theater, comedy, whatever it may be. And I also try to go to a couple of events per year to make new memories. But Gametime now has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. And Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you all the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Plus, if you missed it, they had a great Labor Day offer over there on Gametime, 50% off for Diamondbacks and Dodgers. And so for this Ravens and Bills game, obviously prime time under the lights in Baltimore, be sure to check out Gametime for all of the deals they have. They have super deals and other tiers of deals that you will be very interested in. Plus, the app has a ton of great features such as Gametime Picks, Seat Blues, lowest price guarantee, Gametime ticket coverage, and so much more. Plus, the app is super easy to use and easy to navigate around. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
All right, Kevin, let's talk about this game from the Baltimore side of things. And I think it's been a really interesting offseason getting to this point for Baltimore where I don't think there's been enough said about some of the transition that Baltimore's been dealing with. 3 veteran starters on the offensive line no longer around. Of course, they bring in Derrick Henry, which I think has really motivated a lot of the hype that's existed around Baltimore. But even defensively, losing Mike McDonald and a lot of assistants, right? I mean, you got several defensive coordinators coming out of that, right? Not to mention Clowney and Patrick Queen and Geno Stone, right? Some important players defensively for them last year. So a team with some new pieces that they're kind of sorting out and figuring out. But I think the story is Derrick Henry, right? Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, the same backfield. The production's been outstanding so far this season. What has that duo unlocked for this Baltimore offense based on what you've been able to observe to this point?
Yeah, we've seen so much of it, Joe. And I think coming into the season, there were definite plans of action that this team knew they needed to put into play. And part of that is you can run incredible zone reads off of a Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry backfield combination. You can work play action off of it if your run game's working. You can even with the option plays, you want to put an edge defender in a tough situation, have him try to bear down on Derrick Henry. Lamar Jackson just pulls the ball out. Or if they're worried about Lamar, Derrick Henry can just punish you as well. So this Dallas game in week 3, I thought was a very important game for them because Dallas's defensive front, their run defense is the worst in the league, and they needed to go out there, especially with, you mentioned the offensive line. They had struggled over these first couple of weeks, really trying to find momentum, especially with those younger players, such as the Daniel Falele at right guard. Andrew Voorhees has had good moments and struggling moments as well. And they go out there, and Derrick Henry has 25 carries for 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. We saw the vintage Derrick Henry stiff arm on Kalen Carson, kind of a welcome to the NFL moment for the rookie there. But with the Ravens and what they need to be able to do here and what they want to continue to do, it's just not getting too far away from it because we know Baltimore's team is a run-first team. Their identity is in the run game. But when you are able to get Derrick Henry rolling like we saw against Dallas in week 3, for example, defenses will have to respect that by either stacking the box or just focusing more attention on that ground game. What you can do is, even though Mark Andrews hasn't had the best start to the season, he certainly struggled through these first 3 weeks. Isaiah Likely hasn't had the week 1 success that we saw over these last couple. But you can work play action off of that. And when you find guys biting on that play fake, it leaves wide open receiving lanes for these guys, one-on-one opportunities. And we've seen it multiple times where they have just frozen defenses over and over. And then once defenses realize, we have to kind of back up off of that, well, here's Derrick Henry for you again. Here's another dose of what you just couldn't be able to stop. So it's just this hand-in-hand, kind of yin and yang situation where both Lamar and Derrick Henry can play so well off of each other. Just a matter of them continuing to do it and continuing to trust that as the relationship gets better over the course of the year.
Yeah, over 150 rushing yards in all 3 games. And, of course, making Dallas look like they're Western Carolina playing against Alabama. I mean, that's a soft football team. Let's just say it. Dallas is soft. They hadn't stopped the run in 5 years, it feels like. And it was a great recipe for Baltimore to go in there and really exploit that. And I'm sure there's a lot of momentum coming out of that game for Baltimore and really building off that rushing offense. Let's talk about the passing offense, Kevin. I mean, you're in the weeds with this football team, but I would say from an outside looking in, maybe it hasn't looked exactly how I expected, right? I mean, Zay Flowers, obviously the leading target getter, leading receiver, but Mark Andrews not really the player or the production many would have perceived. You have a situation with Rashad Bateman where it feels like metrically he's open. You've heard some commentary that he's open. And so it maybe feels like there's good things, but maybe not everything's clicking. Like, what's your impressions of this passing offense and what do they need to get done on Sunday night?
Yeah, it certainly has been more of a game, especially in week 3. It's certainly game flow where they only threw the ball 15 times. One of the crazier outlier games I've seen from them where they only had 3 straight dropbacks, I believe was the entire game. So even on some of those plays, we saw pressure given up from the offensive line, but the game flow dictated, like you said, Joe, if Dallas isn't going to stop the run, well, you should run the ball. And that was their effective game plan, and that's exactly what they did. But for this passing offense, we've seen something that I would love to see them do on Sunday night is I'd love to see them push the ball down the field. The Ravens currently, in terms of passing yards, they're 5th in the league with a bunch of different things, but net yards per attempt is the key thing for me here. They're 5th in net yards per attempt, but part of that is because Nelson Aguilar catches a ball for 8 yards and then jukes out his defender and runs for 50 more. There's a screen pass to Derrick Henry, and he catches the ball 2 yards down the field and he runs for 20 more. So they're not taking these deep shots early in the game where I feel like if you can get that deep passing game going, they haven't done. It's been a lot of horizontal, not necessarily a ton of vertical for this team. And I think with players like Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, you can work other guys in that role as well. It just establishes things for you. So you're right, where the big target getters, it's been Zay Flowers. Mark Andrews, you mentioned, hasn't really been a factor for them this season. Didn't even have a catch on Sunday against Dallas. And again, part of that is they only threw the ball 15 times. But I think getting Bateman going and just Lamar and him continuing to establish that connection, he's such a good route runner. I mean, people knew that coming out of his Minnesota days in college. That's a huge part of his game. But he's been injured. Lamar's been injured. Then they're flip-flopping. They haven't been able to establish any chemistry together over the course of the first 3 years of Rashad's career. So Zay one-on-one is always a mismatch nightmare. Isaiah Likely, also, we know that he can be a mismatch nightmare too. But I just think if they can push that ball down the field early, Lamar Jackson was an average deep ball passer over the first couple years of his career. That number has dipped significantly over the last 2 seasons. So being able to get on the same page in that deep passing game, maybe stretch Buffalo's defense out, will be able to reap benefits for Baltimore in this one.
Kevin, that's an interesting thought, because I would say if there's anything I would say is characteristic of the Bills on defense since Sean McDermott's been the head coach is they don't give up plays down the field. I mean, literally every metric, they stand out as it just ain't going to happen. So it's just interesting to me that you would kind of come in with that idea. And I mean, even this year, Miami couldn't get the vertical stuff going. Jacksonville, who Trevor Lawrence was 22% deep throws, the highest in the NFL by like 4%. He only dialed up 5% deep balls against Buffalo in a game where they were down 3 scores, let's be honest, for most of the game. And so if this is the game for Baltimore's vertical passing offense to come alive, I'd be very surprised. But I do think that there's something to be said for if that does exist. I mean, if you get the vertical passing game going and you're Baltimore and you can run the ball like that, I mean, good luck, right? I mean, good luck for everyone else. That's going to be a real challenge. Let's talk a little defense here. Baltimore's run defense, it's been exceptional. We've kind of talked about it already. Fewest yards per carry in the NFL, fewest yards allowed. I wonder your thoughts on this, because it's been really good, and I think it's validated by the adjusted yards before contact are just insanely low. They're not getting displaced, but then also the yards per carry is very low, but also only 53 rushing attempts in 3 games, right? Like you played Kansas City. Kansas City doesn't want to run the ball. Dallas doesn't want to run the ball, especially when they're down. So like, is this a volume situation, a 3-game sample size where you only face 53 runs, or is this just a really tough team to run on?
Yeah, I say it's both. And I'm in your school of thought here, Joe, where I don't necessarily grade how good a run defense or pass defense is off of the total yards, because you're right. If a team runs the ball 50 times, another team runs the ball 30 times, unless you're the best rushing team in NFL history running that ball 30 times, you're going to have more rushing yards for the team that runs the ball more. So yards per attempt is how I judge defenses personally. But Baltimore giving up just 2.8 on the ground.
Yeah.
It's incredible what they're doing out there. Players like Michael Pierce, Travis Jones, who was Baltimore's third-round pick a couple of years ago. He's been incredible, heavy hands, and just takes offensive linemen off their spots with ease. They have guys on early downs on the edge position that can really set the tone there, like Kyle Van Noy, who was, again, just having a phenomenal season early on. Odafe always taking a leap. So the way that this Ravens team has operated, especially with the fact that they have gotten into positive game flow with their offense, it's just been a matter of teams coming back on them. But early in the game, the Ravens are going up, and then teams are like, well, we can't run the ball anymore. This is negative game script for us. We have to be able to get the ball down the field. We have to throw the ball. Teams aren't running the ball in Baltimore as much because they're not up 28-14 on the Ravens with, hey, let's just get out of here, run the ball, let's just do that. It's by the time the first quarter ends, it's, let's say, 14-6. And all of a sudden, if you're an opponent, you're like, well, probably should have been in the run a little bit more than we wanted to. But the thing that encourages me, at least, is when the Ravens are given the challenge to stop the run, even if it's not coming as often as maybe we had all thought, they're stepping up 1,000%. So I think it's both. The teams haven't run the ball on the Ravens a ton, but also when they have had those opportunities, they've stepped up.
Yeah, the personnel tells a story. I mean, you look at the Ravens and throw all the metrics aside. It's like, okay, Travis Jones, Michael Pierce, Broderick Washington, Matabweek, Van Noy's a good edge setter. Roquan Smith. I mean, come on, that's a lot to deal with. And structurally, I know that they're still kind of sorting out their scheme and with a new play caller, but I mean, they're the type of team that presents a lot of challenges. Now, the one thing that's been a problem for Baltimore has been the pass defense. You talk about yards per attempt, not good here, 27th in the NFL in net yards per attempt. They've given up the most plays through the air of 20 yards or more. It feels leaky. It feels a little leaky. I know there's some new pieces in that secondary. So break it down for us. What's going on here with this Ravens pass defense?
It's so interesting, Joe, because Marlon Humphrey, he's actually had a great start to the season, was injured last year, but he has been incredible over these first 3 weeks. Kyle Hamilton had a tough little stretch early in those first two, but he bounced back in week 3. John Harbaugh, again, talked about it. I just don't think they're all on the same page, and there have been some miscommunications that we've seen, obviously, between players, and I think with the new coordinators we talked about with Zach Orr. There are just some early season growing pains there. And then again, like the Ravens ended up shifting their mindset in that Dallas game. And not that they were good before the Dallas game in terms of yards and yards per attempt, but we weren't really seeing a ton of too high shells from the Ravens early in those first 3 quarters. And then they tried to kind of get out of there with a win. They shifted the conservative of, hey, we're not going to let you down and beat us on a 40-yard pass play. And then Dallas just took everything underneath and everything in the middle of the field and eviscerated them in that fourth quarter. So to me, I think that it's just a matter of them trying to find that identity. It's probably a little bit in their heads as well. I wouldn't be shocked if there's stuff going on just in terms of, here we go again in that fourth quarter situation. Baltimore's the team that's given up the most 10-plus fourth quarter leads in the last 5 years and all those different metrics. Yeah. But it seems like they start the game really strong in a lot of different areas, especially in that secondary with guys like Brandon Stevens. And you can attribute it to Marcus Williams has had certainly a slow start to the season. He hasn't really been good for them this year, and they need him to be. But then they have other guys step up like Darius Washington in the slot, and you're like, well, it's kind of this trade-off of guys playing well and guys not. So I think it'll be important for Baltimore, especially because they're a team too, Joe, that doesn't like to let teams beat them deep. They don't like to get that deep vertical passing game going on them. So I'm not expecting a ton of deep shots. I'm expecting both Josh Allen and Lamar to take what's there. They're open rushing lanes for both those guys. I know they can make impacts there. But in terms of Baltimore's secondary, it hasn't been the start that everybody was hoping for.
All right, folks, coming up on the other side of it, we're going to break down the most important things for each team to do to win the game. Be sure to stick with us.
First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So for this Ravens and Bills Sunday night primetime game, Ravens actually open up as 2.5-point favorites in this game at home. You know, the stats surrounding the Ravens, 20-3 under John Harbaugh in home primetime games. So that certainly might have a factor too, but this one is expected to be a big and bright matchup. So if you like that line, either the Ravens as the favorites or the Bills as the underdogs, be sure to head over to FanDuel. Again, just go to FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. We return on Crossover Thursday. Locked on Ravens, Locked on Bills, bringing everything you need to know before that Ravens and Bills Sunday night matchup. Just as a reminder, today's episode of both Locked on Ravens and Locked on Bills is Crossover Thursday. It's brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Man, Joe, I'm so pumped for this matchup. This has been a game that's been circled even just when that schedule release came out. Under the lights, two great quarterbacks, two great teams. But from your perspective on Buffalo's side, what are things they need to do to get the job done and pull it a win in Baltimore?
Kevin, I got 3 things written down. And number one, I think you're going to do crossovers all year long. And if they don't say this first, then I don't know what they're watching. But you got to be ready to stop the run. Obviously, we talked about the potency of this Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson backfield and how successful it's been to this point. And I'm really interested to see how the Bills match up with personnel, because we know Baltimore's going to put multiple backs. They're going to put multiple tight ends on the field, right? They're going to play with big people. Well, the Bills don't play defense with big people at all. There's not been a snap this year that they've played with 3 linebackers on the field. They're 79% nickel. They're 21% dime. They are 5 or 6 DBs on the field, seemingly no matter what. And I know that Baltimore and Miami are different operations, right? Completely different. But they're similar in the fact that they both will put big people on the field. They both want to play multiple backs. They want to play multiple tight ends. Buffalo did not adjust their personnel for that. Now, listen, with Miami, I think you're more concerned with how they're going to push the ball vertically down the field. And so you might invite the run and say, hey, yeah, if you don't want to throw the ball to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, go right ahead. We'll concede rushing yards. And the Bills played 75% too high, middle of the field open coverage, and gave them light boxes on like 17 of 34 runs, like 6 or less in the box on 17 of 34 runs against Miami, and said, go ahead, run the ball if you want to. I don't know if they're going to do that against Baltimore, right? I think you're more concerned, with all due respect to the Baltimore passing game, you're more concerned with stopping the run game. And so do they adjust? Do they play with bigger people? Well, you'd love to play a third linebacker, but your top 2 are out. Matt Milano's out. Terrel Bernard's out. So the guys that would be the third linebacker, they're the 1 and 2 right now in Dorian Williams and Balin Spector. They're playing well in a fill-in role, but do you have a guy that you believe in to step in and be the third linebacker, or do you continue to play with small people and hope for the best? That's an interesting recipe. So be ready to stop the run, and you better be right in your approach on how to do it. Number 2, you got to test the pass defense. You just talked about it, right? Like, they're giving up yards. There's communication issues, guys that are in different spots that aren't maybe playing to where they're supposed to. You got to test it out. You know, this isn't the game to go in and beat your head against the wall and live with a bunch of dirty runs. This is a Josh Allen throw the ball game, in my opinion. And the fact that you don't have Stephon Diggs as the go-to guy, and you do have this idea that everybody eats and you want to spread the ball around, I think that works to your favor in a situation where, all right, maybe they have some challenges with newness. Okay, well, take that to your advantage and know that you can throw the ball. I mean, Josh Allen threw the ball to 10 different players, right? They scored 6 touchdowns, 6 different players against Jacksonville. So take advantage of that and test them out. And then number 3, I know this is very generic. I got very specific with the first 2, but like, you got to be ready for a 4-quarter fight against Baltimore. The Bills, you know, the game scripts got out of control against Miami and Jacksonville. Of course, they played a tighter game against Arizona after the Bills got down 17-3 in week 1, came back and was able to take care of their business. But this is not a game where I think you have any expectation that you're going to go in and have this massive lead and, you know, you're playing your starters with 10 minutes, you're playing your backups with 10 minutes left to go in the 4th quarter. And so you'd love to make Baltimore one-dimensional and say, hey, Lamar, you got to play a drop-back passing game and see if you can come back. You'd love to do it. I don't know if that's something you can go in with that expectation. Meanwhile, like, this is a narrative with Baltimore that they blow fourth quarter leads. So there's that dynamic that exists. And I mean, it happened against the last time these two teams played, that Baltimore kind of gave up a late lead in the game. So you got to be ready for a dogfight for four quarters and playing a unique opponent that presents completely different challenges than what you face to this point.
Yeah, and I honestly almost took the words exactly out of my mouth for the three keys, because for Baltimore, you have to take advantage of your personnel. And if Buffalo wasn't going to adjust and not put the heavier personnel out there and kind of roll with their heavy DB looks, which again, I think the trend over the first 3 weeks has been they're going to roll with it. Yeah. Well, you have Derrick Henry, and with Derrick Henry, I mean, it's tough to put him out there. And you're right, Miami's different, Jacksonville's different, Baltimore's different. But man, Derrick Henry's just a whole different beast in terms of like what it takes to bring him down. And for me, within that first key of running the ball, you also have to be able to open up rushing lanes and take advantage if you're an offense. Because what Baltimore has done is they've used imbalanced lines. They've used offensive line rotations. They do a bunch of stuff up front. You mentioned players like Patrick Ricard, heavy personnel, heavy sets. Those are all things Baltimore loves to work in. And so if Buffalo is being a bit lighter with their personnel, if you just bring in all these heavy guys and you say, all right, we're just going to go straight up with you, more often than not, you would assume at least the Baltimore would have success. And then does Buffalo adjust, and do they have the personnel to adjust, and will they? Are they willing to do it? That's one of the big keys for me. The second one is definitely going to be on the defensive side of the ball. And that is, make Buffalo one-dimensional. And obviously this is more so, can you stop James Cook and Josh Allen in the run game? Obviously, I don't think stop is the right word. It's more so contain with those two guys. But you don't want to worry as much about it. You want to make sure that you as a defense, if you can eliminate any part, Roquan talked about this before week 1, and it's a big point for any team. If you can stop the run or just make an offense one-dimensional in general, it eliminates a bunch of different factors you have to worry about. You talked about that with Isaiah Pacheco against the Chiefs, and you got to make sure, make Mahomes throw, essentially. You got a whole lot of flack and a whole lot of heat for that, considering the player Mahomes is. But the principle itself is, if you can take away an aspect of what an offense wants to do to your defense, it benefits you in so many different ways. And so the consistency there, and the third key with me is the consistency of the fourth quarter. This is a 60-minute fight. It's not 48 minutes. It's not 30 minutes. 4 quarters of play. The narrative is wide open for everybody. Everybody knows what it is with this Baltimore Ravens team. Doesn't matter if it's 14-10, 28-6, 31-17. The game's not over till it's over. And Lamar Jackson's been very vocal about the fact that he wants to just keep his foot on the gas and make sure that the team is done and that there's no doubt that they're winning. But the Ravens have gotten a little conservative with their play calling, both on offense and on defense, to kind of say, hey, let's get out of here with a win. And just that's come back to bite them. So in my opinion, they have to be able to play this game for 4 quarters and kind of do away with that narrative of what it has been. This is not just a one-off or a two-off thing this season. This has been over the last handful of years. As you mentioned, Joe, back to the last time these two teams played. It's been there forever. So for me, I think this is going to be a close, hard-fought game. I think it's going to be a one-possession game. I think this is going to be a close one. Maybe poetically comes down to the kicker battle between Justin Tucker and Tyler Bass. And Justin Tucker right now, 29th out of 29 qualified kickers in terms of field goal percentage, 62.5. So who knows? Maybe a Justin Tucker revenge in terms of getting back on track. But I think it's going to be a close one.
Probably. Interesting line, like you mentioned. I think Baltimore favored by 2.5.
Yeah.
Who knows, man? They'll play it and see what happens. But I think we did a good job of breaking down the key variables that'll sort this thing out when it's all said and done.
Yeah, 100%. So again, Buffalo and Baltimore under the lights, prime time Sunday night football. And of course, here on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills, we'll have everything you need to know about both teams leading up to the matchup. So that'll do it for a crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills. For Joe Marino, I am Kevin Oestricher. We'll see you right back here on our respective shows to round out the week, continuing to talk about Baltimore Ravens and Buffalo Bills football. So be sure to stay tuned. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bills.